All right, now for some analysis on the Congress, we're now joined by our political analyst, Sandile Swana. Mr. Swana, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Well, plenty to unpack, but perhaps let's start here. Of course, now we're already seeing that a number of analysts predicting, that the incumbent John Steenhuisen will retain his position. We know we are a few minutes before that announcement is made. Why do you think that is? I mean, is there somewhat of a fear, that a Mpho win in some way is a far bigger risk, especially, because of the elections of 2024. That said, is John Steenhuisen then the right person to steer the party into that crucial election?
And thanks, Jonathan, to your viewers. To the extent that there is a philosophy of leadership. Remember that South Africa comes from a long history where a minority white group could lead the whole nation, not even making 10% of the population, and lead it for a very long time. So regardless of what happens, they believe that if you have Steenhuisen there, you can marshal whoever else and lead them. What Mpho is saying is that the DA does not have trust in the black majority in the township. It is not trusted there. And their fight also with the PA, which is now Mackenzie, who has got dubious politics, of course. But again, the question that there is an idea of being supervisors, a paternalistic view that if you are colored or African, you must then just subordinate yourself to this white leadership, which is used, by the way, to lead anything in South Africa. So Steenhuisen, to that extent that white leadership is trusted by the DA, whether it's in the city of Cape Town or in the province of the Western Cape and elsewhere, where they get a chance to lead, then Steenhuisen is totally appropriate. As to whether in terms of actual content and competencies he is appropriate compared to any other good candidate out there is another issue altogether.
And now just staying on Mpho and her utterances, in her speech, she emphasized, that it's not the couple of years that count within a political party, but rather one's capability, as someone who has exposure herself outside of politics and outside of holding a political role as a technocrat, if you want to call it that. But it would seem that internally, though, within the party's ranks, if one had to listen very closely, the sentiment is that Steenhuisen does in fact have the capabilities and also the experience, and that Phalatse has very limited exposure in politics and limited to Johannesburg.
This whole issue is very difficult to deal with, but you'll forgive me for using another, perhaps unrelated example, but I think it can illustrate Phalatse's point a little bit. There's a fellow that many people don't know, that when he came into politics, he was already in his 50s, party politics for the first time, Albert Lutuli. And I quote him because he was a Christian, he won the Nobel Prize, he was accepted by many different stakeholders. But he actually did not grow up in the ANC, not at all. But he was seen as a leader who's very credible in the community and was brought in right to the top of the ANC as a president in Natal and then president general of the ANC. And he stayed in that position until he died, not having grown up in the politics of the ANC. So Phalatse, if we use history of South Africa as a whole, is not actually making a far-fetched argument. In terms of history, this thing that she's talking about has happened, and it happened with excellence and distinction before.
Let's just go back to, just some of the examples you were bringing in as far as Mpho Phalatse is concerned, particularly as it relates to black leadership within the DA. I mean, we know, of course, that delegates have rejected the proposed constitutional amendment, that sought to suggest or introduce a deputy federal leader position. Would it not have been, in some way, probably an opportune time to then, just going into the racial policy to bring in another leader in the form of a deputy president who would then be in the form of the likes of Mpho Phalatse, particularly given the history of the DA and its relationship with powerful, strong black leaders within its party?
One has got to ask yourself the question of why was Helen Zille brought back to come and neutralize the efforts of Mmusi Maimane. And Mmusi Maimane was trying to create a situation where the DA is a palatable party in the black townships especially, and in the black community more generally. But it appears that the funders of the DA and the stalwarts of the DA do not believe that. The DA, to my mind, and that is the job of Helen Zille, is that you must have a core of white leadership. And the blacks that come into the DA must be those who are like Bandustan leaders, who are in agreement with the white leaders and subordinate to those leaders. So you are not going to have a leader who's on equal terms with Helen Zille. Helen Zille has been put there, and she said that she was called by people which she did not name them in the interview that I listened to, who these people are. And you must also remember, when you listen to Steenhuisen's statement, that he said around 1997, when he joined the DA political system, they were about 1.97%, they were less than 2%. So how did they get to this so-called 26% that they are talking about now? It was also the fact that they would have absorbed the National Party members into the DA, who are probably 10 times more than the liberals that were there before. And the party is still called liberal. But actually, the actual body of leadership is the Broederbond and the National Party. And you are not going to be able to take the majority. And those are very powerful people. Those are billionaires. Those are professors. They are very capable. So there's no liberal who's going to whip the white liberal who's going to whip them around. They are going to actually insist on what must be done. And they've done that for a very long time. So Mpho Phalatse and Steenhuisen himself are facing that situation. And on the other hand, if they deviate to the extent that Maimane tried to deviate, then the Freedom Front Plus will eat them for breakfast.
Let's stay on with Helen Zille. Of course, she is running unopposed to retain her position of Federal Council chairperson. She obviously made some very interesting utterances saying that she believes that the DA, it is possible for the DA to be the biggest political grouping after next year's general election. Of course, we know that this is a party that has been in an official position status for some 20 years. What do you make then of her utterances?
That is some kind of statement, a motivational statement. It's not a scientific statement. It cannot be a scientific statement. Remember that both parties, the ANC and the DA, have got children. Action SA is a child of the DA. EFF is a child of the ANC. I don't know this Bossa thing of Mmusi Maimane and the other one that has just been started by Bongani Baloyi. So these are parties that have actually been splitting over time. The UDMs, they have children, they've split up. But even if you were to add those children of the DA back to the DA, it is nowhere near the capacity of the ANC and the EFF and their children at the same time. So it's going to be very difficult for a purely more or less right-wing type of organization to actually summon the support that she has got in mind. I don't know which parties she lists in that group that would actually side with them to create that overwhelming number. The only sensible thing that she can do to get those numbers is to partner with the ANC because they've rejected the EFF outright. So if they say then their job is to and neutralize the EFF, then perhaps the most sensible thing, they must partner with the ANC. Otherwise, they cannot win a fight. In 2024, they cannot win a fight versus the EFF and the ANC if those two get into alliance.
And it's interesting that you mentioned that partnership, though, because she also, in that same interview, concedes, that one party's decline. In this case, of course, talking about the ANC and the projected dip of that 50% for the ANC. She says that, one party's decline in membership is not automatically a gain for the DA. So what would we possibly be looking at, should that happen? Should the ANC dip under 50% come the 2024 elections? And what does that then mean for the DA or other political parties that are in the fray?
There are parties that are going to gain. Action SA is one of them, EFF probably another one. And then you've got all these other smaller parties. And there is actually a very worrying thing, because I was looking this morning on the statistics of the ANC, that actually, if I'm reading the statistics correctly, the highest number of actual voters that the ANC ever got was in the Mandela election. So the actual number of voters, although the population of South Africa has been growing, the number of voters voting for the ANC, the total number, which also has been declining, and apparently the participation in the elections themselves has been declining. But to answer your question directly, I would expect that the two major players in the election will be the Action SA, EFF, and the one wild card that is very dangerous for the DA is the same Gayton Mackenzie. We may not like his behavior, we may not like his politics, but if he's able somehow to strike a chord with the so-called colored vote in the Western Cape, then all hell will break loose, for the DA especially.
All right, Mr. Swana, let's leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your analysis and your time.